to 2023. I am honored to be speaking before such an eminent audience. I was listening with pride as one other speaker, our distinguished speakers, said about unveiling the vision of a future robust India. The dynamic drive to sustain the dream run that has planted our nation's flag firmly on the world stage. India is no longer the India of past. It is an India that millions of people are building. It is an India that relies on both the public and private sectors. It is an India that is more digital than much of the world, more connected than much of the world, more productive than much of the world, and more confident than much of the world. It is an India that has gone global, that has gone to the moon, and now is on its way to sun. Today's India is an economic powerhouse on the move. Today's India is carrying millions and millions of hopes, dreams, and aspirations. It is an India growing and accelerating like never before, that we too are, in our humble way, helping to build. And I say this with great pride in speaking for an Indian company. The past decade has been an amazing period. India is building that we need: rural housing, highways and expressways, high-speed rail networks, high-speed digital networks, smart grids, smart classrooms, smart cities. India has pulled millions out of poverty, trained millions of our young people, created millions of jobs, extended healthcare to millions. Our nation's amazing achievements are as massive. They are innumerable. With India climbing every peak it wants to, and with the world increasingly looking at India, we must ask ourselves what more we need. The answer to this question is infrastructure. To be precise, India needs more sustainable infrastructure. To illustrate this need, let us consider Europe's largest seaport, the port of Rotterdam in Netherlands. For over 400 years, from the 15th century to 19th century, it was largely a fishing port. Then it turned into a commercial port to serve the trade needs of the Dutch colonial empire. In the early 20th century, it again adapted to the changing needs of the world by adding bulk transshipment and petrochemical facilities. The big change in approach came after the Second World War, when the ports planner began building new infrastructure with an eye on distant future. They did not build it to serve just the needs of their time. Instead, they chose to build sustainable infrastructure with a shelf life of several generations. Someone over 60 years ago certainly made the right decision, as this example of sustainable infrastructure from the 1960s continues to be one of the busiest ports in the world. Over the past 76 years, our nation has been building our post-independence infrastructure, the fundamental social, economic, and technological structures and facilities that our people need. While our early infrastructure served our early generation well, they soon proved to be inadequate for our growing nation. With few exceptions, they were not built to meet our rising needs. By the time we came to terms with what the world was doing, it was already being replaced by something better. And then we found ourselves stuck with sunset industries and technologies. Or in other words, we always found ourselves a generation behind the developed world. Over the past decades, some bypasses did fortunately come our way. For example, we leapfrogged over several generations of large and expensive computers when we went from physical notebooks to notebook computers. And similarly, we scaled up from landlines to 4G and 5G, and from simple weather balloons to extremely complex lunar landers in a very, very short span of time. Fortunately, things have changed in the past decade. Our planners have embraced the idea that when we build infrastructure today, we must think of tomorrow. Yes, we must ask ourselves are we building for now, or are we building for 50 or 100 years from now? What is the time horizon we are aiming for? Or as Professor Ramcharan puts it, what is the shelf life of our infrastructure? For instance, if we see electric mobility and electric vehicles as a standard part of life in the future, we should prepare for that eventuality. The sustainable infrastructure for such a future is not merely about setting up plenty of EV charging stations. It is about embedding all its current and potential requirement into our power and transport network right now, so that the infrastructure we are building now will have the capacity to shoulder the demand 2 or 3 generations from now. Similarly, we are already seeing the potential of artificial intelligence to drastically alter every aspect of our life. There is no doubt at all that AI is all pervasive and is manifesting itself in millions of ways: in search, in games, in education, in research, in analysis and creativity and creative art, in autonomous mobility, in driverless transportation, in drones, in warfare, in medicine, robotics, and even in personal counseling. No sector will be safe from disruption, and nor will any nation be immune to it. India too cannot afford to overlook these dazzling fast advances in technology. As infrastructure builders, we have no alternative but to make sure that we leave no room to accommodate the demands that this massive expansion in capabilities will place on our nation ahead. If we are to stay abreast of the world, or even better, get in front of the world, sustainable infrastructure should today be the top thought of our minds. And it is, and has always been, the top thought on our mind at Adani Group. Building infrastructure is what we have been doing, and building sustainable infrastructure is our priority. Our transport vertical, Adani Port and SEZ, is on its way. It's on its way not only to be carbon neutral just 1 year from now, but also be the world leader in sustainable ports and logistics infrastructure. In energy and utilities, in airports, in gas, in every area of our operations, we are building sustainable infrastructure for a robust India. The essential foundations that India of the future will need and can rely on. A very relevant example here is what we are doing in renewable energy, where we are building a future-ready mega source of clean, powerful, fully aligned with India's climate change goals. Adani Green Energy, which has one of the world's largest renewable energy expansion program, is now building the largest hybrid renewable energy park in the world, a city-sized solar wind layout right in the middle of Khavda Desert in Kutch. When completed, it will generate 20 gigawatt of clean, green, affordable energy for India. Our vision goes beyond just the massive scale. We also aim to be the most cost-efficient and most cost-effective at that scale, which is why, for instance, we have incorporated robotics into our operations from day one. Today, we are leading the nation's energy transition march. We are now single-use plastic-free, and the airports we manage are running on 100% renewable energy. In fact, on this Diwali, we powered over 3 million homes and businesses in Mumbai with just renewable energy for 4 hours. Our focus is on creating and operating sustainable infrastructure for generations to come, while having the least impact on the environment. As India strides towards becoming a global economic powerhouse, the need for sustainable infrastructure is becoming increasingly critical. With our population set to exceed 1.5 billion by 2030, the demands of our infrastructure will be as heavy as they are unprecedented. The World Bank says that our urban area contributes about 70% of our GDP. However, traditional infrastructure development often leads to environmental degradation, resource depletion, and social disparity. This is where we need to integrate the environmental, social, and economic considerations. This approach is not just beneficial, it is also the only choice for a country like India. As Bill Gates said earlier this year, the question is whether we have the foresight to invest in our future now before it's too late. While I agree that the journey towards a sustainable infrastructure has many challenges, I would view these challenges as gateways to unprecedented opportunities and as opportunities to innovate and rethink our approach for development. The opportunity for India lies in leapfrogging traditional development pathways and adopting cutting-edge sustainable practices. This involves not just government policies, but also grassroots innovation, community participation, and corporate social responsibility. Simultaneously, we must enhance national awareness, ensuring that the concept of sustainability is ingrained in the public consciousness from a young age. For all of us, the journey to building sustainable infrastructure for a robust India promises to be both exhilarating and challenging. It is an opportunity to redefine our nation's trajectory, and it calls for a paradigm shift in how we perceive development and integration of sustainability into the core of our planning, and a commitment to a future that is not just prosperous but also equitable and ecologically sound. Looking at the new India, today's India, I am happy to see that in every sphere of the development, the approach is increasingly telescopic, with focused attention to the future needs of our nation and our people. It is an approach that we at Adani Group are totally aligned with, and here allow me to share our fundamentals. Our approach encompasses all the three essential phases: planning, execution, and operation. In the planning stage, it is easy to fall into the old trap of playing catch-up with the world, of planning a facility that will serve its purpose now but will become obsolete or inefficient or insufficient in just a few years. If we look back at India's early infrastructure journey, it is also too obvious that our infra capacity was always in a catch-up mode, always scaling up to get even with demand, instead of having planned for our capacity to overtake demand and leave it far behind. The unfortunate fallout of playing catch-up for almost 70 years is that India is now having to invest more and more money to scale up or refurbish the old infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, power plants, hospitals, colleges, railway lines, all have to be added, widened, rebuilt or upgraded again and again, all the time. We have been continuously engaged in construction not to get ahead but just to stay in place. This has been a huge drain on our economy, and it has taken away from the otherwise rapid pace of our nation's development. Until a decade ago, we took the route that the developed nations took, a route that forced us to play catch-up for a long time. Thankfully, this has changed, and India is now thinking much more ahead and much more audaciously. We have to unthink ourselves out of planning for just next 5 to 10 years. We have to begin thinking of meeting the demand of the next 30, 40, and 50 years at least. We should be looking at what we will need several generations ahead and build it now. We must find ways to ensure that once we have developed the infrastructure we need, we do not need to redo it frequently or scale it up continuously. We can avoid such pitfalls by choosing integrated planning, where we view an infrastructure project holistically rather than a standalone facility. For example, you can build an airport whose survival depends on the existing infrastructure that is always catching up to demand. With integrated planning, you can build an entire airport ecosystem, like Singapore did with Changi Airport, with networked expressways and connecting roads, rail, and metro system that link to the city and its suburbs, trade hubs and commercial parks that mesh with the airports, hotels and amenities that can handle the ever-increasing passenger traffic, airline support, cargo enclaves, technical services, and so on. When developing this ecosystem, it is important that we assimilate and incorporate local elements. Mumbai Airport is a curated showcase of local art. The Bharat Mandapam is a cultural corridor that brings to life a rich tapestry of tradition. When we integrate local art, local culture, and local architectural elements, whether into massive structures or even simple structures, booths or perimeter walls, it sparks a cultural regeneration that brings back our pride in being Indians. Looking overseas, the American interstate highway system is a good example of integrated planning. The current highway system is almost 70 years old, but not only is it serving its planned purpose, but it is also revived local pride all along its length and also seeded the United States post-war economic boom. I do not know if they planned a shelf life this long, but they certainly didn't plan for 2 years or 20 years. It is interesting that its current length of close to 80,000 kilometers is actually the length the original planners wanted way back in 1918, over 100 years ago. Not only does integrated planning take care of our current needs, but it also takes care of our future needs, perhaps even for a couple of generations ahead. I must say that integrated planning has worked very well for us too. I was just a young boy when our chairman, Goswami Adani, began building Mundra Port in 1990s. Even though demand for port services in Mundra was tiny at that time, he sought approval for a waterfront length of 40 kilometers. Why? Asked everyone. They all thought it was extremely audacious, since the 40-kilometer length he had requested was 4 times that of the waterfront of India's largest port at that time. Today, the answer to that why is plainly visible. We asked for it because he was thinking ahead, yes, audaciously. He asked for it because he believed as strongly then as he does now in the India growth story. And he knew that one day, in the not so distant future, Mundra Port would need the length of waterfront to accommodate our nation's growth. Thanks to his early vision of sustainable infrastructure, Mundra Port is now not only the largest port in India, but also one of the fastest growing ports in the world, with a vast variety of industries within the port's integrated ecosystem. The third vital element in planning is inclusiveness. Are we building for everyone, or are we being selfish and restrictive in our planning? I believe it is important and also the right thing to do that we be as inclusive and as possible when building infrastructure. We must not assume that women, children, and differently abled people will automatically benefit from new projects. We must consciously plan for their needs, be it access ramps, assisted safety features, recreational space, or other inclusive facilities. Only then will it be sustainable infrastructure. In the second phase, that of execution, integration and scales are as important as they are in the planning phase. Sustainable infrastructure goes hand in hand with the quality of execution and the scale we have planned for. It is not simply about large corporates executing large projects, but more about how we are simultaneously training and imparting skills to a great number of people, how we are creating more and more qualified vendors, how we are enabling the growth of a vast pool of SMEs and MSMEs, and how we are making all of them part of the whole supply chain and the value chain. Also, we often tend to overlook the impact of a project on the surroundings. And in this era of volatile climate change, we cannot afford to do so. When executing a project, we must ask ourselves, are we being environmentally conscious? Can we use sustainable materials? Can we use renewable power? What more can we do to harmonize our presence with the local ecosystem? Infrastructure projects usually cause at least some disruption in the local community. Integrated execution can minimize or even avoid this disruption by bringing in local communities as stakeholders in infrastructure creation. This sustainable approach allows them to become custodians of their own development. One towering example of integrated execution is the Statue of Unity, the world's tallest tribute to a statesman, our own Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. It's fascinating how comprehensively the project has integrated the local community into its execution. So much so that every aspect of the operation is now in their hands. Truly, the local people have become the custodians of their own development. This also spans the third phase, that of operation. Infrastructure that is built sustainably must also be run sustainably. The challenge here is about dealing with the change. The great waves of change that wash our industry, technology, and indeed over just about everything. It is an endless loop. The only way to deal with change is to welcome change. This calls for constant improvement and continuous upgrading of the skills, of the technology, and of the processes that enables the project to sustain the needs of the nation and the people beyond the expected lifetime. Finally, no discussion of sustainable infrastructure would be complete without addressing the financial challenges. History tells us that 70 to 80% of infrastructure companies fail because they lack the right financing structure. I find it quite strange that financing arrangements for infrastructure are spread over only 5 to 10 years when the concession periods usually stretch beyond 30 or 40 or 50 years. This is seriously crippling mismatch. I believe this strongly indicates a larger need for India to develop its own long-term bond market and long-term financing environment so that Indian infrastructure companies have access to stable long-term capital. Today, the India growth story is such that we can not only build at the scale and sizes of any country, but we can also outdo them and leapfrog over their growth paths. I believe that we have the drive, the potential, and the environment to become the standard for the world to follow. Over the next 20 or 30 years, we have the opportunity to create sustainable infrastructure, both physical and digital, at a level that the world has not seen yet. I believe that India is the place to be, both now and ahead. I believe that if we work together, we can build an India that leads the world. I thank you all for giving me your time, and I also thank Republic Media Network for this opportunity to be heard. Thank you.